Welcome, everyone. I'm Damian Conforti, the co-chair of our hospitality group here at Mandelbaum Barrett. Today, I'm here with Todd Dennis and Lauren Magenta. We're going to talk about what every restaurant should know about influencer marketing. Lauren, welcome. How are you today? And happy to have you with us.
Yeah, I'm so excited to talk about this. I'm good. I'm excited to chat.
Lauren, you're involved in the influencer world. How long have you been doing that now?
Oh my gosh. Probably about 15 years. Some of my first clients were restaurants well over a decade ago. So I'm definitely very passionate about this. I grew up in North Jersey. And so restaurants and food have always been a huge part of my lifestyle, and now I've made it my work.
I know maybe our users know you, maybe not, as the founder of Magenta Media, right?
Yeah.
And the creator of Own Your Brand. What is that?
Yeah, so I help big and small brands use social and optimize and grow on social. So particularly when it comes to storytelling, and part of that includes influencers, which is why I'm so excited about today. I feel like it's this black hole in the social space, particularly for businesses, how to step into it. Own Your Brand is how I consult and coach these businesses. I help them build content plans, but also strategies that get them to their goals faster. So whether it's sales, whether their business has hit a plateau, whether it's exposure, and it's always exposure, and influencers are directly tied to getting new audiences. So I coach big and small businesses in how to storytell online, and that is Own Your Brand.
Terrific. And of that, those big and small businesses, how many of them are restaurants or bar rooms or in the hospitality space?
Oh, that's a great question. I would say probably at this point, probably 30% of my businesses are brick and mortar food, but I actually, believe it or not, some of my bigger clients, like Faye Yogurt, I would still say it's food adjacent. And we do some of their content planning and strategy.
Okay, terrific. And seated next to me is Todd Dennis. Todd, welcome.
Thank you for having me.
Todd, one of my great partners here at Mandelbaum Barrett, and Todd is all things intellectual property with an emphasis on helping our clients protect their mark, right? Protecting their trademark. I know you do a lot of work in that space. Todd, can you tell us a little bit about how you help a client who may come into the fold or is an existing client protect their trademark?
Sure thing. I appreciate you having me on board here. I've, represented some folks in the hospitality space, both in the food and on the hotel side, protecting brands, really. That's generally speaking, 90+% of what I do on a daily basis is helping clients either select a trademark that they have proposed to see if they've got any risk in using it, and then protecting that trademark. And then if it comes to that, enforcing that trademark and enforcing that brand against somebody who might be infringing up against it. And sometimes, you try to help them things that they didn't think about. Maybe not everybody thinks about protecting a slogan or a tagline that they're using in connection with their business, but that's something easily protectable. There are restaurants that have, specific designs to them in terms of the layout of the actual space. And believe it or not, that is something that can be protected. So sometimes it's helping with outside the box thinking, rather than just your name and your logo, and, trying to grow that business for them in any way they can.
And Lauren, you mentioned you work in the hospitality industry, you work with restaurants, hospitality businesses. You're a collaborator, right? You're coming in, they have a goal. Maybe it's not real defined and specified, but I imagine the goal is generate traffic, generate buzz, draw clientele to the business. And can you talk to us a little bit about how you initially collaborate, and then maybe Todd can fill in there in terms of what you need to do to protect yourself in that collaboration, as well as the restaurant or hospitality owner protecting their mark in the collaboration process?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a good question. So, yes, I think restaurants, for example, there are definitely different parts of the timeline when I step into a restaurant or a brick and mortar space. I have stepped in pretty early on. I think Todd, I actually have questions for you. But like for example, in a restaurant's opening, I may step in and collaborate and say, okay, what menu item is going to be on this menu that is custom and unique to this restaurant? Because if we are going to create buzz or create traffic, there's got to be something to get people in the door, especially in this day and age. What is that thing that gets people in and what is unique? I wonder if some of even the menu items could be trademarked. I feel like that's an interesting conversation. One restaurant specifically, we were making sure that there was like a true engagement play, like the clients were finishing the recipe at the table, so mixing and melting chocolate and creating part of their dessert. Because think about it, what do people want to post? They want to post action. They want to post something cool. And so it's almost like gamifying the restaurants. So when I'm brought in that early on, my work could impact the menu and the menu item, which is, I think, my favorite part of stepping in because I am impacting the business from that perspective. But a lot of times, and probably more cases than not, the business is already running. Maybe they've hit a plateau and we need to change things up. It's like, okay, it's not working, or what's not working. And whether it's, we kind of come up with a hook, it could be a food, a price point, maybe it's a special that we then get to market. I think a lot of the work I do, if you really zoom out, it's like marketing and PR. That's what social storytelling really is. It's how do we market it, and then how do we get people in the door and move that buzz. So obviously I love stepping in at the very beginning, and that could have impact on the business, but then we kind of can rock the boat a little bit if I step in and the restaurant's already moving. And that could be anything from, I always say this, getting influencers in the door. The right people need to come in. We could talk about this, I know, a little bit later, but like a blanket call for influencers is seldomly the move, I'll say. I'm sure there's opportunities for that, but working with the right people to find the right people to come in the door. If it's family friendly, if it's a high-end restaurant, you need the right influencers to come in and speak to their audience. And that's generally part of the relationships that I have with brick and mortars.
So Todd, maybe we start there at the beginning, where a restaurant who is not familiar with influencers, hasn't worked with an influencer like Lauren in the past, and is hesitant to do so because they're protective of their content. They're protective of their mark, their brand, and they're worried about, well, all right, this might be a great opportunity for me to drive new business, but what am I giving up if I do collaborate with Lauren Magenta or another influencer and allow them access to my space, my proprietary recipes, all the things, the secret sauce that make this restaurant great. And then, that's going to be on Lauren's publications. It's going to be out there on her socials. Am I going to suffer, or, is this something I'm just a little bit hesitant about exploring because I'm giving up what is so, near and dear to me?
Sure, and that's where we come into play, right? We come into play to try to protect, I'm protecting assets every day is what I'm doing. And that's how we do it, is through contract, right? You want to make sure that you carefully identify, and that's something that Lauren and I would help, work together. We would be collaborative there, and identifying what it is that, the restaurant wants to protect, what do they have to protect, and then make sure they protect it. And whether that be a name, whether it be a logo, in that contract, you carefully identify, what is the influencer going to be doing? What are they going to be using? Who's going to own what? Where are they going to be able to post it? How are they going to be able to post it? The number of times they're going to post it, those types of things. And one thing that, that you might not really think about is, at the end of the day, an influencer is just a person, right? And sometimes, pros and sometimes cons. So, I think Lauren would come into play with what she just mentioned. You're going to carefully vet that influencer to make sure it's the right influencer, not just for you now, but hopefully in the future as well. So as part of that contract, you would want to include, kind of a morality clause, so that if that influencer, kind of does something that you don't think is on brand for you in the future, then that allows you to terminate the contract with them. It's those types of things that, that we get paid to think about and to protect the client.
I think it's also, sorry.
No, go ahead, please.
To piggyback off that, I think it's also worth, like, when we build for these restaurants, these social plans and influencer plans, there are two types of, well, there are probably a million, but there are two types of relationships that the restaurants want to consider with an influencer. So if we're building an influencer plan for X restaurant, there's influencer, which is traditional, which is, and the agreement will state everything you did amazing with the list of things the agreement has to state. But the goal is that the influencer posts about it, right? A true quintessential influencer relationship. You are coming to an influencer, they are going to create content with you, and then they are posting it. You're trying to get their audience. But the other option, if a restaurant has concerns of ownage and usage, you could do a UGC relationship, which is still working with influencers because you have the human side. You could hire a team of influencers to come create content, but UGC content typically has the restaurant owning the content. And so the agreement would have to be specific to that, but that's a good piece of advice for local restaurants when you're pulling, let's say, anywhere from 5 to 100 influencers. Do you want them to be influencers and post about it on their page? Or do you want the content? Do you want that organic, rich content, which is called user-generated content, where they come in, you don't need a photographer, you don't need a videographer. They come and produce everything on their phone, but you own it at the end of the day. So there are those two different types of agreements that the restaurant can decide which one makes more sense for them.
So let's stick again with, I'm still the reluctant buyer here, right? I'm still the reluctant advertiser. It's not the way I've done things for the last 5 years, the last 10 years, the last 15 years. I'm a newbie to this space. Or I should say, are either of the two types of collaboration slash influencer agreements that you just described, Lauren, and Todd laid out how those can be structured, are they for everyone? In other words, is there a reason why a restaurant should not consider this at this point? Is it going to be detrimental to their brand? And at this point, I mean, at this point in time, where we all know the power of social media, we all know how value is derived and where people are earning, and it's all through social media, or at least the overwhelming majority is through social media, whether you're a traditional business, brick and mortar, as you said, or you're an internet startup. So why would a restaurant, I'm still that reluctant person in a hospitality business, not take you up on this, or not take up an influencer on the ability to go out and produce content for them?
Yeah, I would, if I was speaking directly to a restaurant that was reluctant, I would push them into the user generated category, because they still have control over how the content is distributed, right? User generated is, think about it. It's basically the idea of, instead of hiring an advertising firm or a video production company, you're hiring real people to come and experience your product. Obviously, my hope is that any client that comes to me loves what they do and is passionate about their work. I always say, like, if you love it, someone else is going to love it too. So I would say, if someone is so reluctant, I would say we need to start with user-generated content, because it's just more authentic. Like, come on, if we zoom out, the user does not want to be sold in a traditional advertisement anymore. They just don't. Like, if someone was so reluctant, I would say, well, this is what's working, right? I have over 150 brands in the last couple of years, and social media is skyrocketing some of these businesses, right? A social plan, an influencer strategy. This is where people are getting sold. And it would be much more organic if you had 5 influencers come in at their own time to experience and film, and then you own the content. Right? User-generated content allows them to own it. And if they were so reluctant, I would have them do a campaign of UGC before traditional influencer.
So it seems like all the reasons are there, right? All signs are pointing to why not? Why not try this? Todd, what are the risks? We've brought in, Magenta Media, Own Your Brand. Lauren Magenta has made my restaurant go viral. I imagine one of the concerns might be, well, maybe I go viral for the wrong reasons. What are the legal risks of my content is now out there in perpetuity, right?
Yep.
Once it's out there, it's very difficult to get something off the internet or unavailable in all respects. What would a restaurant, again, I'm still that doubting Thomas. What do I need to know the risks are? We've heard all the great things and the great opportunities and possibilities that Lauren can create for the restaurant. What do I really need to be zoned in on if I'm going to take this on and make this a new advertising opportunity for me? What do I really need to be concerned about?
Sure. First and foremost, I think it's the vetting process, and that's where Lauren's going to come into play tremendously, is to vet, so you make sure you get the right influencer. And then once you find that right influencer, then you work with Lauren and the rest, and the client and the influencer, to find out what everybody's comfort level is in terms of what are we going to do? Are we going to go UGC? Or are we going to go the more traditional influencer route? And frankly, that's really going to be on the client. What are they comfortable with? And then once you have that, then it's up to us to make sure that we address those risks and concerns. And, I've seen things personally blow up where, a small, tiny little pizzeria has blown up because it's gone on social media and they've protected nothing from an intellectual property standpoint. So they're doing a little backtrack. So, what you'd really want to do is you'd really want to be out in front of that and make sure on the intellectual property side, whatever it is you can protect, whether it be a name, a logo, the name of a menu item, a slogan, those types of things. Make sure that if that's the relationship you have with the influencer, that you're going to own the content. And then, what I mentioned earlier, make sure that you've got a morality clause in there. If the influencer ever does something that you want to be able to terminate that relationship and separate yourself from the influencer. And then something I didn't mention is kind of dovetails with that. You want to keep tabs on that influencer, even when he or she is done with whatever they're doing, whatever the campaign or the project is. keep tabs on them to make sure what they're doing, to make sure their future projects are consistent with the message that you have had them, give for your restaurant or your bar, that type of a thing. And then other than that, you're hoping you sit back and reap the reward, and you've covered those risks, and then you're ready to just watch everybody come in through the doors.
All right, so you both convinced me to consider it, right? I
Yes.
know I've got
Big step.
I've got my great trademark mark protection attorney here in Todd Dennis. Lauren, I've seen what you can do. I've heard about you, word of mouth. I've talked to people who say, I have to sit down, I have to consider using you. Biggest question I'm sure you get, or maybe not the biggest, but one that I'm sure is in the top 3, if not number 2, is what's this going to cost me? How are we going to structure this? Right? How are we going to structure this that I'm willing to take a chance, and I want it to be an effective chance? I want to see a return on my investment. I've now got my lawyer involved. How do I structure this in a way where, again, to use your example, the Main Street pizza place, and I want to take a chance on this, but I have a pretty good feel in all these years what my clientele is and where I'm going to get customers. Dave Portnoy is not showing up at my front door, and I'm not going to end up delivering to 3 states overnight. So what's a deal? How can we make a deal that is going to be comfortable for me, and allow me to pursue this but not break me at the same time?
Totally. Great question. Okay, compensation. And yes, that is definitely probably the number one question outside of results, numbers and results and views and engagement and all those rates. Okay, so one thing I like to remind people that traditional advertising agencies or month over month retainers, I do always ask restaurants, like, what is your marketing budget? When it comes to influencers, there are a million ways, and I can give you probably 3 examples of how we can work with them. But what is the marketing budget that you would have paid someone for advertising, for Meta? Like, this is something that doesn't get included. Often when a restaurant or a location or a brand comes to me and they're like, oh, well, what would my influencer budget be? I said, well, what are you currently spending on marketing and what's the goal? We could back into it 2 ways. I had a client recently say, I want to sell 1,000 of X. I said, in 30 days, by the way. I said, okay, well, what's the budget for that? Because we could do anything. But, and I backed into it with certain influencers. I tiered it out for her, and it was a jarring number. And I said, well, we have to prove ourselves. You're a new business. It's different than 1,000 cups of coffee, right? Like that we could do in one day. So what I would say is, first, we look at the dollars. That matters most. What is your budget? When we tier out influencer relationships, there are probably, let's talk about 2 or 3 different ways we can do it. For example, one of my clients goes to restaurants and she sells a reel. So that's a video that could be on Instagram. To be honest, at this point, it could be anywhere. Typically speaking, TikTok or Instagram would be its big spots, could be on Facebook, could be on LinkedIn, at anywhere from 500 to 900 a video, right? So what I always recommend with particularly my restaurant businesses is loyalty. You don't want to get 10 influencers all making one video. That's not going to land. That feels like an ad. So instead, should we do 3 to 5 influencers who come in 1 time a week for a month? Because now you have to think about it from the audience's perspective. Oh, if Lauren goes 1 time with her family for pizza, cool. But if Lauren goes every Friday night for pizza with her girls and her husband meets them from the city, like, now you're selling a story. Now you're selling reality and loyalty and family and love and date nights, right? And so that's kind of the magic of the social world, is it's really not just PR. I'm not just trying to get pizza at your door. I'm trying to create a story for these restaurants that makes the influencer's audience fall in love. It's kind of like a whole trick, if you will. So what I would recommend, one really great option is, let's say a client's budget is $5,000 for the month for this. How many influencers can we back into that? I mean, even if it's $1,000 a month, budgets can range anywhere from $1,000 to $20,000. I think traditional marketing, if restaurants are used to that, or media agencies, it is easier to back into a bigger influencer budget. If the influencer budget is smaller and we cannot pay the influencers for, let's say, a month of a relationship, you can do a wider spread. And this gets tricky, and Todd, don't yell at me, but we can comp meals, right? So we could say to families, hey, $500 worth of meals, and I'm going to look to you for all of the agreement stuff, but we could say to 10 families, right? Because that's going to cost the restaurant what? You can come in for 4 meals over the course of a month. This is where I have some negative experiences that I'm more than happy to share from some of my clients, the comped meals get tricky because other agreements, if you're paying me $1,000, it is easier for me to do it on time, send it for review because I'm getting paid at the end. But if I'm getting paid up front with my meal, things do get tricky from a legal perspective. And I have seen that. But I would say it really backs into the client's budget. Like whatever they have monthly, my team can build out a strategy for that. And I always say there's nothing too little. Like sometimes ice cream shops, you could gift X number of cones just to get people in the door. And that honestly starts that wheel of, oh, I saw Lauren there. Oh, I saw Lauren there. Oh my gosh, Lauren and Alyssa went. But that all, I mean, it sounds easier said than done, but the strategy is from like the social media lead or consultant saying, okay, what's the goal here? We want loyalty or we want sales, or maybe if it's a higher end restaurant, people aren't going to come 4 times in a month. So now we need to sell a different story. It's date nights, it's anniversaries. We're looking for influencers ready to celebrate. Maybe they just got engaged and we can comp a meal that way. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, no, absolutely.
There's a lot. This is really, there's a
We
lot
have
to
a lot
talk
of content here. I agree. Frequently asked questions, Lauren. Let me throw one at you. If someone tags my restaurant, can I repost their photo without asking?
Okay, very good question. I would start by saying, where are they tagging you? If they tag you on stories, it is a safe place because inside the app, they allow you to reshare. So if it's in stories, you can share that. It's 24 hours, it lives and dies. Whoever posted it owns the content, and I'm sure Todd can back into that, but whoever posted it owns it. So if you want to post it to your feed, include it in any video or reel, you would need to ask for permission, which is super simple. A quick DM, hey, we love your shot, can we use it, and credit you. I think crediting goes a long way. I have seen some restaurants put in their bio. This is actually a really good tip, particularly for a restaurant or any type of experience that someone is having on social. The restaurant or location can put in their bio something that says, hey, by tagging us, you're giving us permission to use this on social, right? Like that's a pretty clear, I don't know if you would call that like a blanket, I don't know, approval or whatever the case may be, but it sets, I think, clear expectations for the audience that if the restaurant's tagged, they're allowed to use it on their social channels. I feel like that's a good tip for restaurants.
Yeah, no, it's I think clients often come to you with the question, should I ask for permission or forgiveness, right? And it depends on your risk tolerance. Sometimes, in my opinion, it's always better to ask for permission. And if you don't get the permission, then it's up to the client to decide, is it worth the risk? And what's the risk? Lauren mentioned, whoever generates the content, they own that content. They are the author of it. They own the copyrights in that content, in the video, in the text, whatever it is that they have posted. And so, yes, I would think that most people are probably happy for you to repost because, then it gets them out there more, exposure as well. So what's the risk if you do it? The risk is that they could sue you, but that's up for the client as long as we counsel them on the risk. So it's always better to ask for permission. And generally speaking, I think you're going to get that permission. And the idea that Lauren mentioned of, having kind of a blanket, permission, if we're tagged, then we can go ahead and repost. That's up to the poster, the original poster, then to know what they're doing if they tag you. And so, I think that does provide, certainly some level of comfort for the restaurant to go ahead and repost, even if they don't get explicit permission.
How about just some general overarching principles that a restaurant should have in mind if they're going to, go the route of an influencer or retain Lauren to come in and work with them? I know we've covered, be as detailed as possible on what the agreement is going to cover and look like. Is there anything that you would add to that, just a frame of mind to have in the back of the restaurant owner's mind when they're sitting down and they're considering someone like Lauren?
You just want to make sure that you cover what the influencer can do, what the influencer can't do, and who's going to own what. And you just got to try to come up with as many scenarios, and that's where Lauren really comes into play with her experience with the influencers in terms of helping identify those potential risks that maybe I hadn't thought of. I can certainly, from my experience, think of a lot, but I'm sure that Lauren has some that I would not, and that's where the collaboration comes into play in terms of trying to get that agreement as buttoned up as possible.
So one other question for Todd, then I'm going to come back to you, Lauren. Todd, is there anything you can do if an influencer posts something negative after you've brought them in and your understanding is you're bringing them in, obviously, to create and promote a positive experience? What would be your recourse if for whatever reasons they decide to go the opposite direction.
Yeah, sometimes you have to tread lightly, right? Whenever somebody wants to send a letter to, whether it be, an opposing an entity that maybe it's infringing a trademark or opposing counsel, you always have to be careful because that could end up on social media, right? And I've seen it happen. You need to be careful about that. Even more so than you were, 20 years ago. And, it's somewhat akin to that. You obviously want to cover that in your agreement to make sure that they don't say anything negative. But if it happens, you got to tread a little bit lightly because you have to delicately, work with that influencer to maybe, to A, take it down as quickly as possible, and then B, try to find out what their concerns were and alleviate those concerns without offending them in a matter. I think, going guns blazed, like a lot of litigators might tend to do, is not the right answer because that you're just going to end up with more posts. So
100%.
Treading lightly, get them to take it down while you're working it out to find out what the concern was and how you can resolve that concern and address, that concern to, maybe they had a bad experience. It happens. Well, what was the nature of that bad experience? Let's get to the bottom of it. Let's talk to, get all the parties together, talk to them, hash it out, and, make it right. Make it right both by the influencer and the client.
Lauren, back to you. Thanks, Todd. If I comped someone's meal, do they have to disclose it as a hashtag ad? Do you understand what I mean by that question?
Okay. Of course I do.
All right.
And great question. So all of this falls under like the FTC disclosure and rules world. If a meal is comped, you actually don't have to tag it as hashtag ad. It is not an ad. But we do need to still disclose that it was gifted. This is like a true quintessential world of influencers. Lots of stuff is gifted. The skincare girlies, that's all gifted, right? And what's the expectation? That you will hopefully post about it. So I think a good tip for when you're gifted meals or comped meals is acknowledging with simple words like, thank you to X Pizza Shop to continue that, or thank you X Pizza for Friday night family dinner. I am making it clear that Pizza Shop gave me dinner. More formally, you could say gifted by. That's something that you'll often see at the bottom right of someone's stories, gifted by X Pizza Shop, or using the term hosted, making it painfully clear that this has been provided as a gift would be the answer to a comped meal.
Okay. And Todd, a nightmare scenario. And it doesn't have to be influencer driven, but where you've dealt with a client who says, Todd, you're my protector. You're here to protect my mark. There is now this content, this material out there that is destroying my brand. What, if you can give us an example of where that's occurred? I don't know if you can, but if so, what have you been able to do, or what has the client been able to do to try to protect themselves in a world of once something is out there on the internet, in the ether, it's always there?
Obviously I'm biased. I'm a trademark attorney. That's how I make my living. So I'm definitely biased. But I do think that, for just about every business, if not every business, getting out in front of making sure that your name, your logo is protected, can be essential. That's one way that, you want to make sure that, your brand, your identity is yours and nobody else's. And if an influencer uses that in a negative manner, well, there's potential ways to try to explore, did what they do, is it protected by the First Amendment? Is it not protected by the First Amendment? But if somebody comes to your restaurant and they have a bad experience, it can be a little bit difficult to put that horse back in the barn. So obviously, social, influencer aside, you want to have your best staff putting their best foot forward every day. And, just maybe, find some examples out there just to show them what can happen. It can destroy a business. And, if that name is protected, that's one thing. But if your name is protected and you're doing a lousy job, it doesn't help you in any way, shape, or form. So it is really hard to kind of, stop bad content other than don't give them a reason to have that bad content in the first place.
I've said to restaurants in the past, like, make sure your bathrooms are clean, because if you're inviting influencers in, like exactly what you said, managers, staff, happy, friendly, like all of these things, you want everyone to have a good experience, let alone now a paid or compensated engagement with someone, they will post. So yes, everything you're saying, I agree with, like just protecting all of it, because you're inviting people into your location, which is your business, and everything should be smooth sailing. I always say that. So thank you for saying that.
All right, so now that Todd has sufficiently scared everyone about what happens if we open the door to influencers and, exposing ourselves to this world, right? We're bringing in, the social media world into our restaurant for the first time. Why should they go ahead and do it? Why should they pull the trigger and take the leap of faith Give
Yes.
us a success story if you can, Lauren.
Yes. Yes. Well, my bread and butter is helping restaurants and businesses grow, and Todd even scared me, so that's not good. Okay, so what I have seen, and this really rings true for all businesses and obviously restaurants as well, is the idea, and I call it social storytelling. It is the idea that when we open ourselves up and tell this organic story, even though it's strategy, but it's this organic story, and particularly inviting influencers in, it is that word of mouth. It almost feels like a word of mouth referral that helps businesses grow, right? So even though you might be compensating or paying an influencer, my audience feels like it's a word of mouth referral. And if it can be done the right way with the right social lead, that is where businesses grow. So, I mean, I have dozens of success stories, but a really great one is a meal prep company that I worked with in Rhode Island, where they were just dealing with a very small audience. And she started coming online. Her influencer was different because it wasn't brick and mortar, but it was providing meal prep services for families in her area in exchange for posting about her. And she ended up having to grow her kitchen and get more staff in the kitchen, more food. I can't remember if it was like she doubled her orders in the time that we worked together, but it was just that word of mouth referral that completely changed the game for her. Something that was a manageable small business turned into something really beautiful. I mean, I've had businesses grow 277% once igniting influencer relationships, grow 3x their revenue when they allow other people to help promote them, is essentially what we're doing. But I think that meal prep one is a good example because she used other families to promote her service. And through that came so many new clients for her.
Anything else?
That's all I've got. Sorry for scaring everyone.
That's good.
That's your job.
All right. Well, thank you to Todd Dennis, my partner here at Mandelbaum Barrett, trademark protector, and Lauren Magenta. If you don't know about her, check her out. Magenta Media, own your brand, see what she can do for you as an influencer in the hospitality space and otherwise. Lauren, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you guys. This was awesome.
Thanks so much, Lauren.
Take care.